Greetings, everyone. Laszlo Montgomery here, back home in Cali, and not a moment too soon. On my last night, as I sat in my hotel room at the Steigenberger Metropolitan, something like 5 or 6 inches of schnee had fallen and kept falling as I made my way to Frankfurt Airport. And after a 2-hour weather delay, the plane was de-iced, and I was winging my way back home to go spend the Chuxi dinner with my family. And I had some big lug in front of me who not only had his seat back for the entirety of the time spent de-icing on the tarmac, but also for the whole 11 hours back to LAX. That was my fate, and I bore it stoically. And my colleague was sitting right behind me in the next row, so I didn't want to be rude to her by, moving my seat back and grabbing a portion of her limited personal space for my own greedy comfort. She didn't have her seat back, and the Laszlo Montgomery principle of flying in coach is, and I'm paraphrasing, if the passenger behind you doesn't put their seat back down, then neither do you. And if they do, hey, then it's fair game. Anyway, I get asked 1,000 times how long to fly from here to there. Here's the answer to all those who have never traveled on a long-haul flight from one part of the world to another. No matter the distance from where to where, in coach, it's a 36-hour flight. And in business, it's a 4 to 6 hour flight. And in first, wherever you're going, never more than 2 hours. Well, as you no doubt noticed, I didn't upload the Kublai Khan podcast that was first aired back in August. It's still available from my website and on iTunes, so I didn't rebroadcast it. We're just going to get right into what happened after Kublai Khan died in 1294. I can summarize in a few paragraphs what happened to the Yuan Dynasty, founded by Kublai Khan in 1271, after he passed from the scene. Basically, nobody could hold it together. Kublai Khan left a whole lot of grandsons, and it didn't take long before they were all conspiring against each other, and internal squabbles just speeded up the demise of the Yuan Dynasty. The administration of the government and the army was in total shambles. Nobody was in charge, and by the 1320s, 30s, and 40s, there followed one natural disaster after another, particularly with floods up in the north. And this was always the classic harbinger of the end of the dynasty. You see, like Qin Shi Huang and Sui Wendi, two great conquering emperors who went on to found dynasties, the Mongols were good at conquering, but lousy when it came to running their empire. And Kublai Khan, he was like this. His policies didn't work, and his foreign wars was just one debacle after another. His ventures in Southeast Asia, in Annam, Champa, Cambodia, and in Java, all failures. And his extremely costly attempted invasions of Japan in 1274 and 1281, where the divine kamikaze winds protected Japan from the Mongols' wrath, also contributed to the decline of the Yuan. The way he set up the provinces, making each one sort of a mini-imperial government in and of itself, completely eroded central authority. It was like the trust system. These warlords sort of, out in the provinces were supposed to look and act like vassal states surrounding the nuclear state where the Yuan Empire ruled, which was mostly parts of Hebei, Shanxi, Henan, Liaoning. But nothing worked. In no time at all, it was like the end of the Han Dynasty, or when the Tang started to disintegrate. Right at the tail end of the Yuan Dynasty, you had this potent cocktail of popular uprisings everywhere, natural disasters, you had secret societies springing up like the White Lotus and the Red Turbans. The 1350s were like all those other times in China when one dynasty was on its way out and another one was starting to form. You had a number of contenders as the Yuan Dynasty started to wind down. It all came down to, about 3 guys who faced off to wear the mantle of dynasty founders like Qin Shi Huang, Zhou Wu Wang, Liu Bang, Jin Wu Di, and Tang Gaozu. The winner was Zhu Yuanzhang, born October 21, 1328, the year of the founding of the House of Valois in France. To give you a Western point of reference, he hailed from Anhui province. Like the Han Dynasty founder Liu Bang, Zhu came from nothing. Liu and Zhu were the 2 leaders of ancient and medieval times who came from such humble beginnings to rule China. In modern times, you had Chairman Mao and the Great One, Deng Xiaoping, 2 leaders who also came from a poor or semi-poor class background. Zhu was an orphan who had even taken the life of a beggar in his youth. At the age of 16, his family was killed during one of the Yellow River's more serious floods. In times of famine, he lived in a Buddhist monastery and received a rudimentary education. After the monastery where he had sought solace was destroyed by the Mongols, he devoted himself to rebellion and overthrowing the Yuan. In 1352, he joined the White Lotus Society-inspired Red Turbans. Without getting into too much detail, the Red Turbans were sort of a society or rebel group that combined aspects of Buddhism and Zoroastrianism. There he grew within the ranks of these anti-Yuan dynasty rebels to the point where he gained supremacy over the army. In 1356, his army captured Nanjing, and it was there that Zhu Yuanzhang set up his base. By 1363, he started to look like he was the front-runner to take over China, and by 1366, through the loyalty he claimed from various military commanders, he controlled all of southern China from the Three Gorges to the Yangtze Basin. He became the first person in Chinese history to ever rule the whole country from a southern rather than a northern base. The battle that really did it for Zhu Yuanzhang is significant because up to that time in 1363, this Battle of Lake Poyang, or Poyang Hu Zhizhan, was the largest naval battle the world had ever seen. It was mainly fought between Zhu Yuanzhang and his chief rival for power, the Han Emperor Chen Youliang. In this battle, you had some of the same fireboats used back in the old Three Kingdoms period when Cao Cao was defeated at Red Cliff by this tactic. Now, in these times of chaos, when no one was in control of any central government, you'd have these warlords sort of wrap themselves up in the name of one of the great dynasties of days gone by. So Chen Youliang, he was the Han Emperor based in Wuchang in present-day Hubei. And this Han had nothing to do with the one of Liu Bang fame. The other main rival was Zhang Shicheng, a.k.a. Prince Cheng of the Dazhou dynasty. He operated out of Suzhou. As for our hero, Zhu Yuanzhang, he had fashioned himself as the Prince of Wu. So these rivals were all positioning themselves and fighting to inherit the country that the Yuan were losing due to all this Mongol internal strife and the steady drumbeat of rebellion. And they all faced off in Nanchang and ultimately at Lake Poyang from August 30 to October 4th. Poyang Lake, by the way, is China's largest freshwater lake. It's located in Jiangxi province, just northeast of the capital, Nanchang. The main battle was actually only 3 days, but sort of dragged on till October. So Chen Youliang and then Zhang Shicheng were both defeated, and with them gone, the path was clear for Zhu Yuanzhang to make his move. And once the word got out, amidst all the tumult in society everywhere, that there was now a peaceful and safe haven in Nanjing, people started flooding in. And after it became the Ming Dynasty capital, the population of Nanjing had grown something like 10 times. In January 1368, Zhu Yuanzhang established the Great Ming Dynasty. He was the second emperor since Liu Bang in 202 BC to come from such humble beginnings and later found a dynasty. Liu Bang, of course, founded the Han Dynasty, or more accurately, the Western Han. And Zhu Yuanzhang, he founds the Ming. The Ming lasted 276 years, from 1368 to 1644. 9 months after the founding of the dynasty in the south, the Yuan capital at Dadu was taken. Dadu was, of course, the name of the city that later in the Ming Dynasty is renamed Beijing, or Northern Capital. However, when Zhu Yuanzhang takes the city, he renames it to Beiping. The early years of the Ming Dynasty was all about cleaning house and getting rid of any leftover Yuan Dynasty loyalists. And, of course, the entire infrastructure of the country was devastated from all the chaos that went on during the end of the Yuan and into the Ming. There was agriculture that needed urgent care, and the Grand Canal had fallen to disrepair. Everything that had been left more or less unattended to all these years was now finally getting addressed. Even though the dynasty officially starts in 1368, they were still bringing the outer fringes of the country into the fold. Sichuan was tamed in 1371, and the Last one to be conquered and brought into the umbrella of Ming Dynasty China was the southwestern province of Yunnan, with all their steep mountains and valleys. By 1381-82, it was all over, and China was at last not only united, but united under a Han Chinese ruler. When these Ming armies invaded Yunnan, by the way, and defeated the rebels there, a young 11-year-old Muslim boy was captured. His name was Ma He, but later on he gains fame and immortality as the eunuch Zheng He, who sailed the seas in the name of the Yongle Emperor in ships that were like the Titanics of their day. And then, when it's all over, when the Ming Dynasty falls in 1644, you have yet again another foreign invader sitting on the throne in the Forbidden City. Then it's not until Sun Yat-sen in 1912 that the Han Chinese again are the masters of their own country. So the Ming is the last Chinese dynasty where you have the Han Chinese ruling. And this is also the first time that the initiative to reunify China came from the south instead of being imposed by someone from the north. So Zhu Yuanzhang rises from nothing to become founding emperor of the Ming Dynasty. Starting with the Ming and also with the Qing Dynasty, emperors are known in the history books by their era names. Zhu Yuanzhang's era was known as the Hongwu era, and he was therefore referred to as the Hongwu Emperor. His temple name is Taizu, and if we follow the ways of the past, he would have been known in the history books more commonly as Ming Taizu. In the past, each emperor's reign would be divided up into, little different eras, and each era would have an era name. But starting with the Ming Dynasty, there's only one single era per reign. So henceforth, until the bitter end, the emperors are known by their era names. And the first Ming emperor was the Hongwu Emperor. He made a couple mistakes right from the get-go. First, he did what a lot of conquering leaders do. He kept the dysfunctional bureaucracy intact that he had inherited from his predecessor, in this case, the Yuan. Secondly, he put too much faith in his generals and didn't change the Yuan military structure either, at least not at the beginning. He reigned from 1368 to 1398, a total of 30 years. Things sorted themselves out, and before long, Nanjing became a haven for men of talent escaping the chaos in the countryside and in the north. A good government was then, little by little, put together under the Hongwu Emperor once the Han were in and the Yuan remnants were all flushed out, and the Confucianists made a nice comeback during the Ming, and one of his first great successes was in agricultural reform. Huge improvements to public works related to agriculture were made that led to over-the-top achievements in production, and then this, in turn, led to a huge increase in the population in China. The Great Wall was also looked after during the Ming Dynasty. Practically all that there is left of the Great Wall today, if you ever visit it, are the parts that were rebuilt and fortified during the Ming Dynasty. And even that is mostly crumbling ruins. The part of the Great Wall just north of Beijing in Badaling was restored in the 20th century and opened up to tourists in 1957. This is the part where, you see the world leaders, or you saw Nixon, are always photographed and where all the tourists flock when they visit Beijing. While the parts of the Great Wall fortified during the Ming didn't totally stop the Mongols from invading from the north, it had the desired effect in slowing them down and limiting their incursions into China proper. Now, before we get into what the founding Ming emperor was also famous for, let's look at his other great achievements. He's also credited with the Daming Lu, or the Law Code of the Great Ming. Like its name suggests, it was a whole new legal code that took China's legal system of the Tang and sort of brought it to another, more refined level. The Hongwu Emperor was a friend of Islam and openly and unabashedly praised the Prophet Muhammad and welcomed Muslims from all over Asia to the Ming Empire. The emperor even wrote this famous work called the 100-Word Eulogy. It was a 100-character piece that essentially sang the praises of Islam and ended with these words written by the Ming Emperor himself. Jiao Ming Qingzhen, Muhammad Zhi Sheng Gui Ren. Religion pure and true, Mohammed, the noble high one. Well, we'll come back another day and look at Islam in China. It's quite a long and interesting history. And you'd think that the Hongwu Emperor would embrace maritime trade and would reach out to foreign lands to expand trade and diplomacy. Not this emperor. In 1371, he issued the Haijin, a ban on maritime trade. And just like that, after everything that happened during the Song period, the first Ming emperor just slams the door and says anyone who wants to trade with China must do it through the tribute system. Anyway, the ban's purpose, which was to curtail piracy, especially from Japanese pirates, and to, catch smugglers, it didn't work out. Nonetheless, it stuck around till 1405, and by that time we're into the next emperor of the Ming Dynasty, the Yongle emperor. He's the one, as I said, who sponsored the voyages of Zhenghe that began in 1405. Paper money makes a big bang during the Ming under the Hongwu emperor. They weren't the first to use paper money. The Mongol Yuan dynasty also saw paper currency, but that whole system collapsed once things started nosediving in the 1350s. The Hongwu emperor attempted to bring this feiqian, or flying money, back into use, although he held merchants and traders in lower regard than those engaged in agriculture or scholarly pursuits. He knew the benefit to commerce that paper money presented, so he gave it his full support. Compared to strings of copper cash, paper money was light and easily transportable and definitely the way to go. The Ming Chinese paper money was not anything that would fit in your wallet. It was the size of an A4 sheet of paper, or something close to a U.S. letter-sized sheet. It was made from mulberry bark paper and only printed on one side. Now, the government faced the same problems with counterfeiters that anyone else did. They printed a considerable reward right on the paper note itself to anyone who informed on the counterfeiters, and there was also a stern warning regarding the fate that awaited the counterfeiters. So the Treasure Note Control Bureau was formed in 1374, and they had the first Ming banknotes in circulation by 1375. To cut to the chase, the Hongwu emperor, as I said, he was a simple man who came from humble beginnings, and historians have characterized him as a little rough around the edges. He was not a specialist when it came to monetary policies. Basically, he printed too much money and would just pass out stacks and stacks of these notes to visiting tribute missions. Of course, the money had to be spent within the empire, but he still printed way too much money, and before long, word got out that the link between the paper money and the copper coins, which they claimed to equal in value, was no more. And soon, a 1,000 copper cash note was worth maybe 250 copper cash, and later even much less. Once this whole experiment with paper money broke down, it was silver bullion from then on. Well, aside from all these good things, this emperor, who like Liu Bang, 15 and a half centuries earlier, rose from nothing to found a dynasty and an empire, had a little bit of a paranoia problem. His reign, aside from all these advances in learning, commerce, finance, patronage of Confucianism, and navigation, and getting the empire back in order after a slow, excruciating demise of the Yuan, this emperor is best remembered for his bloody purges and his gruesome punishments. In time, he became suspicious of everyone around him, and it was extremely averse to hearing any kind of criticism whatsoever. In fact, there's an old story amidst the worst of the emperor's purges. Some upright official or Confucian scholar petitioned the emperor in person to speak out against his excesses, and he brought a coffin with him, and after he had spoken his piece to the emperor, he climbed into the coffin and prepared himself for the emperor's wrath. And the story goes that the Hongwu emperor, respecting this man's sincerity and bravery to dare speak out, pardoned him and considered his advice. The Hongwu emperor, Ming Dynasty, he was not a good guy to work for. Going back to almost when he became emperor in 1368, there were many stories about how he grew increasingly volatile, and one little thing would spark some reprisal from the emperor. In the 1370s, and as he got closer to the end of his 30-year reign, he could blow his stack at the slightest incident or suspicion, and the consequences were not pretty. There was this constant threat hanging over the heads of those who reported to the emperor and who had some authority that they'd get caught up in something not of their own making, and that would end their career and possibly their life and that of their entire family. It was said that his wife, the Empress Ma, was the only one who could keep the lid on him and was able to calm him down whenever he flew into a rage. But after she died in 1382, he really went overboard. But this first Ming emperor, he was suspicious and paranoid of rebellions, of secret societies, and later on even the military, where he himself had come from. No one was safe from these frequent political purges. The Great Purge of 1380, where he did away with his prime minister, Wu Weiyang, led to the deaths of up to 40,000 people who he suspected as enemies or conspirators or even remotely connected to the conspirators. And he went after not only his enemies, but their families as well, and anyone who ever had the misfortune to be connected to the disgraced prime minister. And as a side note, after this incident, when he suspected his prime minister was conspiring against him, he did away with the entire palace administration and henceforth handled day-to-day affairs himself. The prime ministership, chancellery, everything, both done away with. So if you imagine like President Obama in the White House, just doing away with his whole White House staff, making all his photocopies by himself, answering every email, answering the phones, talking to the press, dealing with the Congress and foreign relations. I mean, that's what happened. And of course, this turned out to be the biggest bottleneck in Chinese history, and things started to fall apart with regard to the administration. As for his handling of the provinces, the Hongwu Emperor's way to deal with keeping tabs on all parts of China was to fill these positions of power in these principalities with his sons. And theoretically, he need not fear any rebellion then, with his own flesh and blood watching his back out in the provinces. And his hatred of Buddhism also ceased around this time, and they once again fell out of favor. Rather than look at Buddhism as part of the state structure, which is what they had become, they were viewed upon with deep suspicion. So ever since the first Buddhist temple was built in China in 68 AD, the Buddhists, they rode this roller coaster, sometimes up, sometimes down, depending on the emperor at the time. So with this emperor, now they were down. And he couldn't stand the eunuchs and issued all kinds of orders and directives to keep them out of the government and from doing all the things that they did that gave them this nasty reputation for meddling of the worst sort. And now later emperors didn't feel this way, and after the Hongwu emperor passes from the scene, eunuchs make a comeback and from then on out are involved in all aspects of the government administration. So, after a good 30-year run as the founding emperor of the Ming Dynasty, Zhu Yuanzhang, Ming Taizu, the Hongwu emperor, he died in 1398. It was he who restored Chinese rule to China after almost a century of rule by the Mongols. It was indeed the end of an era, but a new era was about to begin, and just as Tang Gaozu founded the Tang Dynasty, it was his son, Tang Taizong, who allowed the dynasty to reach much greater heights. And so it was with the founder of the Ming and his son, Zhu Di, who became known as the Yongle Emperor. But before this Zhu Di becomes emperor, there's a whole mess that has to be cleaned up regarding the succession to the throne. The Hongwu Emperor, he passed in 1398. The original crown prince, he had died much earlier, and the new heir was the crown prince's son, the Hongwu Emperor's grandson, Zhu Yunwen. The better choice was the emperor's strong-willed and obviously talented younger son, Zhu Di. So after the Hongwu Emperor dies, his grandson is named the Jianwen Emperor, and Zhu Di, he starts planning his next move to take what he believed was rightfully his. And it's this move that we'll look at in the next episode when we look at the Ming Dynasty Part 2 and the splendid reign of the Yongle Emperor. He was the one I said where you had the voyages of Zheng He, so we'll also look at the great Chinese Muslim eunuch Admiral Zheng He, whose voyages were stuff of such great legend. We're going to stop here with the death of the Hongwu Emperor in 1398 and pick up next week when Zhu Di outflanks the Jianwen Emperor and usurps the throne, setting himself up as the third Ming Emperor. And we'll look at him next time. And well, when you look at the Ming Dynasty, basically it's just these two guys, Hongwu and Yongle. They're the two main emperors, and all the best stuff sort of happens during their reign. I mean, yeah, you still have Jia Jing and Wan Li emperors, but we'll just pack them and the other remaining Ming emperors into one big snowball, and we'll call that the Ming Dynasty Part 3. And then we look at the Qing, and that's all, folks. The China History Podcast, patented, copyrighted, China Dynasty Overview series will be finished. Since we started with the Xia Dynasty back in September of 2010, I have received so many emails with suggested topics and so many interesting questions and comments. I mean, after we finish the overview, we'll take a break and I'll do another Q&A podcast. But for now, I am signing off with my profoundest apologies for the delay in getting this podcast episode uploaded. I know I'm 3-4 days later than usual. It took much longer than I thought to get back into the groove after my Germany trip. And my colleagues at the head office in China are back in the office after a restful Chinese New Year holiday, so the post-Chinese New Year crush of things to do that piled up after the holiday in Ningbo, coupled with all the stuff going on besides that, has left me with little time to get this one uploaded when I had hoped to. But there it is, and I hope you'll keep listening next week when it's the Ming Dynasty Part 2. This is Laszlo Montgomery of the China History Podcast, wishing you all a beautiful farewell from lovely Claremont here in sunny Southern California, going up to 79 degrees today. Join us next week, won't you, for another exciting edition of the China History Podcast.